Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talks in Chinese Humanities, a series hosted by the China Studies Centre and Chinese Studies at the University of Sydney, as well as the Australian Society for Asian Humanities. My name is Minerva Infald. I'm an assistant lecturer in Chinese history at the University of Melbourne. Uh, before we start today, I would like to just acknowledge that I'm speaking from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I will now hand over to my colleague, Josh Stenberg from the University of Sydney, who will introduce our speaker for today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Minerva. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce today Sylvia Liu. She's a PhD candidate in history at the University of Wollongong, and her doctoral thesis, Teresa Teng and the Cultural Cold War in East and Southeast Asia, examines popular music, cultural governance, and Cold War cultural politics across the PRC, Taiwan, and the broader Sinophone world from the 1970s to 1980s. The session that we have today is about an hour long, so I think Sylvia will speak for 40, 45 minutes, something like that, and leave some time for questions and answers at the end. So time is limited. Without further ado, I will pass on to Sylvia. Please join me in welcoming her for what I'm sure is going to be an entertaining and thought-provoking talk.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Minima. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Before I begin, I would like to thank a few people at the University of Sydney. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Josh Stenberg and Ping for the invitation, and also thank Dr. Minerva Inwards for chairing this session. I'm also grateful to the China Studies Center here for hosting this session. This paper was previously presented at a research seminar here, and I benefited a lot from the comments of Dr. Minlu Chen and Professor Anthea Taylor for their valuable comments at that time. Finally, I would like to thank Dr. Boren Zhang for her generous help with improving the clarity and the language of an earlier draft of this paper. Thank you all very much. Okay. Today my presentation is based on my article published in the International Journal of Asian Studies, titled "No Revolutionary Songs, Yellow Music, and Everyday Resistance in Maoist China and After." In this paper and today's presentation, I will discuss how yellow music became an indirect form of Chinese people's everyday resistance, and how the public soundscape became a space where the negotiation between those yellow music listeners and the CCP government over its cultural policy happened from Maoist era to early reform era. The photo I placed in this slide is the book cover of an edited volume titled 怎样鉴别黄色歌曲 How to Recognize Yellow Songs, published by People's Music Press, 人民音乐出版社 in the early 1980s. In this book, the CCP cultural officials heavily criticized the music of Taiwanese singer Teresa Teng. So who is Teresa Teng? Teresa Teng, also Deng Lijun, was a Taiwanese cultural icon and was one of the most influential Chinese pop singers of the 20th century. In the early 1980s, her songs were condemned in official discourse as decadent music, 靡靡之音, and pornographic songs, 黄色音乐, which literally means yellow music in Chinese. Those labels shows how music categorization was not simply aesthetic, but also moral and political, as Teng's music was officially criticized and even blocked. So her listeners had to list her songs secretly. And this photo is from the scene in the Feng Xiaogang's film titled Youth, 芳华. You can see a group of young members of a state sponsored cultural troupe, 文工团, secretly shoot her music tapes and listen together. Here we have a look of this scene in the film.
这什么呀？
你马上就知道了。
邓丽君。
浓情千万缕，为了你盘踞，多珍惜。
干嘛呀？这是？
听他的歌就得有气氛。
今生永不渝，今世永不移。长藤替老鼠，
还能这么唱歌呢？
不瞒你们说，他一张嘴，我腿都软了。
思想怎么那么肮脏呀？
Okay. Oh, sorry. So Teng's case raised two broader questions. The first one, what kinds of music were officially promoted and what kinds of music were officially blocked? The second one is, how did ordinary people respond to the official attempts to regulate listening? To answer the first question, we have to figure out what is yellow music. Yellow music was a historical categorization closely associated with 时代曲, which literally means modern songs. 时代曲 is a cultural hybrid product of Chinese and Western music. It combined Chinese folk melodies, Hollywood film music, and American jazz, as most of 时代曲 was produced in Republican Shanghai for entertainment and profits. It's also deeply embedded in urban media culture. One of the most representative figures of 时代曲 is Li Jinghui, who was widely regarded as the father of Chinese popular music. His work, Drizzle, 毛毛雨, is frequently cited as the beginning of Chinese popular music. As music scholar Andrew F. Jones showed that the emergence of 时代曲 was tied to trans-Pacific circulations of musical records and musicians. As 时代曲 was closely connected to the Sino-American musical exchange and American music industry, it was very easily to be criticized as the influence of Western colonialization in China by the left-wing intellectuals and musicians. Particularly in the 1930s, when Japan invaded China, it was increasingly condemned as stagnant and linked to capitalist and colonial cultural influence. Thus, the category of yellow music was shaped by a global cultural exchange, colonial modernity, and domestic discourse. Hence, the category of yellow music has its own long history before the CCP developed its own musical critic. Before the CCP blocked the yellow music at a large scale, its precedent, the KMT government had already prohibited the yellow music from a policy level. In 1947, the KMT government confiscated a lot of popular music records or yellow music records in the post-war Shanghai, as they argued that those music were produced by the collaborators of Japanese military during its occupation. From the perspective of the KMT, those music were produced for the entertainment or profits, which was created to slap the will of Chinese people to resist the Japanese invasion at that time. In CCP's terminology, 流行歌曲 popular music was unlike the 时代曲 which we mentioned before, which were created for commercial ends. Instead, the CCP's popular music was referred to mass songs 群众歌曲 or public songs 大众歌曲 which were created for the masses. Since the Yan'an period, the CCP created a lot of revolutionary songs to educate and mobilize the people, the masses, to resist its enemies, including the Japanese military and the KMT armies. After 1949, the CCP successfully transformed the China into a propaganda state, in which it actively promoted the red songs, 红色歌曲 or revolutionary songs, 革命歌曲. Those red music were mainly the marching songs praising party leaders, revolutionaries, and collectivism. In contrast, those songs associated with romance, gentle melodies, bourgeois sentiment, or lack of revolutionary spirit were officially condemned as decadent music, 靡靡之音, and yellow songs, 黄色歌曲. As a result, most of lyrical songs produced before 1949 were labeled as yellow music and was not allowed to play in the PRC. Thus, musical labels functioned as a means of distinguishing between political legitimate and illegitimate forms of listening in the PRC. However, the category of yellow music was not fixed, as the society of the PRC is not static. The boundaries of yellow music are shifted with the changing of the political climate of the PRC. During the anti-rightist campaign 反右运动 in the late 1950s, the category of yellow music expanded significantly. For example, a song titled 'Fisher Woman' 渔家女 which depicted the hardship life of the fisherwoman was reclassified as yellow music because its composer was identified as a rightist in this campaign. Thus, the definition of yellow music was not only related to its melody, its lyrics, its spirit, but also related to the political identity of its songwriters. Moreover, in this campaign, many traditional folk songs which were allowed to play in the early years of the PRC were perceived as not progressive enough in this time. And then those folk songs were labeled as yellow music as well, in this campaign. One of most important outcome of this campaign in the CCP literary critique is the binary of fragrant flowers and poisonous weeds. 香花 versus 毒草, which refers to the opposition between red music and yellow music. This kind of official critique were widely utilized in most cultural discourses, including the film, dance, and music, and these discourses even continues into the early 1980s. Furthermore, many foreign music were allowed to play in the early 1950s, especially the Soviet songs were officially promoted. However, as the Sino-Soviet relations broke up in the 1960s, those Soviet songs also fell out of favor. As the definition of the yellow music in the 1960s contains the elements related to feudalism, capitalism, and revisionism. 风之修, thus, the songs from revisionist Soviet Union was not revolutionary anymore, but it's belonging to yellow music. During the Cultural Revolution, only a few of foreign songs, such as the Internationale, was treated as revolutionary. Most of foreign songs were perceived unhealthy by the government and thus blocked. Thus, the public soundscape of the PRC was not simply the opposition between yellow music and red music. Instead, the Chinese people initially enjoyed a diverse music culture in the early years of the PRC, including the selected foreign music, the traditional folk songs, and the official sanction and the officially state-sanctioned music. However, as more and more political campaigns were launched, the political climate of the PRC became more and more radical than those songs which were previously tolerated were increasingly reclassified as ideologically suspect and placed under the label of yellow music. Finally, in the 1960s, the public soundscape of the PRC was dominated by the opposition between yellow music and red music. After Mao Zedong passed away in 1976, the CCP central leadership launched the reform and opening up 改革开放 in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The popular music from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the West flooded into mainland China with other commercial and cultural products. However, those popular songs from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the West was classified as yellow music by the CCP government. Particularly, the songs associated with Teresa Teng were publicly denounced as decadent, yellow, and poisonous weeds. As Teng's music usually depicted the romantic love, the personal feelings, and emotion and individual emotions. The CCP cultural officials argued Teng's songs promoted the individualism, 个人主义, and the pursuit of leisure, 享乐主义, which are the part of the spiritual pollution, 精神污染, and bourgeois liberalization, 资产阶级自由化 in the early 1980s. This expansion of yellow music and the official cultural critique inherited from Maoist era reflected Cold War mindset rooted in an imagined threat of an ideological enemy, even though the political climate of the PRC changed significantly in the 1980s. However, a, a turning point came in February of 1985 when the official newspaper, Beijing News Daily, Beijing 青年报, published an interview with Teresa Teng, which marked the lifting of the ban and a shift toward a softer official stance. The reason why the CCP changed its attitude towards Teng and her music, I will discuss later. In this poster titled "Beautiful Images and Merry Songs," we could observe that the leisure lifestyle and the Western commercial products such as Coca-Cola, which were previously criticized as bourgeois liberalization in the early 1980s, became more visible in the public visual culture and even became a lifestyle that Chinese people wanted to pursue in the late 1980s. Even though the CCP launched a lot of political campaigns to suppress yellow music and promote revolutionary songs, not everyone buy it. As the writer Zheng Nian records in her autobiography, she records when she was asked what kind of music should be played in her home in the Maoist era, she answered, anything at all but no revolutionary songs. John's accounts reflected a broader problem, that is, the CCP's state-sanctioned cultural products and its cultural policy could not satisfy all listeners' aesthetic desires. In other words, the yellow music always has its own listeners. From Maoist era to early Reform era, the Chinese people find several ways to circulate yellow music. Here I just discussed two important channels. The first one is listening to the enemy radio broadcasts, 偷听敌台. The enemy radios refers to the international radios operated by the foreign countries, which the CCP perceived as the enemy. From this propaganda poster, we could say that the radios from Soviet Union, Vietnam, and Taiwan were perceived as enemy radios. Not to mention the Voice of America, the BBC, and even the Voice of Japan. Since the 1960s, more and more international radios incorporated the yellow music into their broadcasting programs as a part of the psychological warfare, 心战. For the Voice of Free China in Taiwan, 自由中国之声, they regularly played Teng's music from 1970s to 1990s. They even have a special program titled Teresa Teng Time, 邓丽君时间. However, such behavior, listening to enemy radio broadcasts, could be a very served crime in Maoist era. You might be charged as a foreign spy and sent to the labor camp to do compulsory labor. If you were discovered for listening to yellow music through the foreign radios. However, the implementation of this policy varied a lot at the grassroots level. If the police officers in your district did not care about the foreign radios, you might face no punishments even if you play the yellow music through the foreign radios publicly. The second channel of circulation of yellow music is smuggled and pirated music tapes. Generally, those music tapes were smuggled from Hong Kong and get pirated in Guangdong province, especially in the Zhanjiang area. Then they will be sold to other provinces and districts of mainland China. The quality of those pirated recordings is not good, but those pirated tapes are very cheap, which make it very affordable for ordinary Chinese people. It is very interesting that many CCP officials and the management of the state-owned enterprises also participated in this smuggling industry. For example, according to the documents housed in the Guangzhou Municipal Archives, many smuggled music tapes was not confiscated once they were discovered. Instead, they were sold to the CCP cadres and circulated across different departments of the government with a much lower price than the black market. Then, through those international shortwave radios and smuggled and pirated music tapes, Teng and her music swiftly swept whole mainland China in the 1980s. Teng was so popular in China that Chinese people even compared her with the leader of the PRC, saying that listen to old Deng by day, listen to little Deng at night. 白天听老邓，晚上听小邓。Her great popularity in Chinese society, together with other factors, reshaped the CCP's attitude toward her and its cultural policy. An important factor is the PRC's change in its Taiwan policy. In 1979, the CCP replaced the concept of liberation, 解放, with the term of reunification, 统一, in its letter to Taiwanese compatriots, 告台湾同胞书. Meanwhile, it also stopped its bombing to Cayman Island, and in many situations, they used the concept of peaceful reunification, 和平统一, in its official statements. Thus, in the 1980s, the CCP adopted a more friendly approachment to solve its Taiwan issue. The CCP proposed mutual communication, particularly a culture exchange between Taiwan states. However, the Taiwanese government was quite determined to refuse the CCP's reapproachment. But anyway, Teng and her music still benefited from the PRC's reorientation in its Taiwan policy. Another factor is the CCP's internal power struggles. The 1980s, China is not like the internet myth that usually depicts this era as an era full of hope and liberalization. Instead, the 1980s is full of backs and forths. Sometimes when the conservatives were stronger. Teng and her music was criticized and blocked. But when the reformists were stronger, Teng and her music were tolerated and even embraced. And in this context, in 1988, when the reformists took the power again, the CCP cultural officials even planned to invite Teng to perform in Shanghai. According to a party document housed in Shanghai Municipal Archives, the CCP officials argued the invitation of Teng to perform would help promote emotional ties across Taiwan Strait and fulfill the long-held wish of mainland audiences. This document highlighted Teng's symbolic connection to Taiwan and the heavy pressure from her numerous listeners in mainland China, which compelled the CCP to make a compromise in its cultural policy to cater to the musical taste of Chinese people. Finally, we move to our conclusion. Under the long-standing framework of the opposition between red music versus yellow music, listening to yellow music was treated as a deviation from party ideology in the PRC, as those yellow music listeners might face any punishments from the government. Meanwhile, the rejection of official music in favor of alternative sounds reflected those yellow music listeners' dissatisfaction with the state-sanctioned music products and the state culture policies. Moreover, the circulation of yellow music from Maoist era to early reform era and the failure of the CCP to suppress the yellow music exposed the limits of the CCP's cultural control. Thus, I argue, listening to yellow music became an indirect form of everyday resistance. But I have to highlight that not all yellow music listeners were acting with apparent political motivation, because some people just listen to those songs just because they think the melody of the songs is good, not because they really accept the ideology or messages conveyed by those yellow music. But anyway, their behavior of listening to yellow music was still a challenge to the CCP's cultural policy and its authority in fact. Finally, the history of yellow music from Maoist China to early reform era reveals an ongoing negotiation between yellow music listeners and the CCP cultural governance, especially the CCP's shifting attitudes towards Teresa Teng and her music, from censorship and critique to partial tolerance and eventual appropriation, shows that the CCP cultural policy was reshaped by popular demands, power struggles within the party, and the cross-strait Cold War politics. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.